G'day everyone, welcome back to the art room. I'm Colleen Herbert and today I'm going to show you a project I do with a class that I call my plaster figures. So for example, this is the student example of a plaster figure, and this is one of a little bug that we have a play with to get us started in handling the medium. So the first thing I'll do is I'll explain to you a little bit about sculpture. Sculpture is a 3D piece of work. So what that means is you can actually see it from all sides. So it's not flat like a painting or on a canvas or a piece of paper. So you can grab your sculpture and I could walk around and see that from all sides. It can involve modeling, molding, construction, assemblage, cutting, carving and chiseling. The mediums that we're going to have a look at, that you can look at, are clay, metal, wax, plaster, found objects and wood. So there's lots of different mediums that you can use and lots of techniques that you're going to use. What we're going to have a go at doing is moulding. So that's consisting of adding to and building up forms. So we're going to do that with the plaster material. Now it's nice and soft to get you started, and then as it dries, it hardens up. It's like when you break your arm and you get a plaster cast on your arm or your leg. It's the same sort of thing. Not the same thing, but that's the material that we're going to use to have a play at using. So there are two different forms of sculpture, which is figurative, which is representational. And these forms are derived from real objects or figures enhanced by the sculpture. Thus, our piece is going to be figurative and representational because our piece is going to be based on the human figure. Another type of sculpture is abstract, and that's non-representational. So that forms no direct reference to an external influence. So you can use lots of found objects, natural objects, and you can break that back to very organic and geometric shapes to create your sculpture. The first thing I get my students to do is have a play at doing some figure drawing. So you can see here I've grabbed Ben 10 because Ben 10 is cool, and then on the piece here there's some basic shapes and forms that the figure is started off with. So that's what I get students to have a go at doing in their sketchbook. The next thing I get them to do is they need to choose some sporting figures, and they need to get these sketched in their sketchbook as well. So again, breaking these into shapes, and we usually get 2 or 3 drawn. Next we go along and we choose sporting figures that could possibly be used for their plaster sculpture. Now the thing with you when you're choosing to do a sporting figure, you have to consider its base, and its base is what it's actually going to be standing on. Is it going to be standing on one leg? Is it going to be standing on 2? Will it stand up on its own, depending on how you put it together? Once students have had a look at their sporting figures, we then have a look at sculptors themselves. So this here is Alberto GIACOMETTI, Edgar Degas, Augustin Rodin, Henry Moore and George SEGAL. So students have to find an example of each of those students' artists' work, and we have a research task in which they can have a look at. So I'm not going to go through all of those points, but you would be able to contact me and then I could send you that document, and that's got our steps on there. Now, what they then need to do is go on and adjust their figure that they've drawn earlier, and they've got to have the influence of GIACOMETTI. So what that means is they need to lengthen the torso of the figure or exaggerate the torso of the figure so that when they come to putting together their own figure, they've got that exaggeration of GIACOMETTI. The next thing we do is to get students to have a play at using the wire and the plaster is I get them to make little bugs. It's not an assessment, it's not a formal task, it's just so students can have a little play at using the materials and the mediums. go. And depending on how we go for time, depends on whether or not we can paint them. I've got some examples of some of the figures and sculptures that the students have done. The first thing we do is we make what's called a wire armature, and this is the basis of our sculpture. We look at doing different wire techniques. So this is something that I've just got off the internet, and I'll include the web address as to where I've got that off. Then what we do is students start to add plaster to their figures, and they need to think about their base. So you can see that this one's got a nice strong base and some of the features are a little bit exaggerated. Now here is a beautiful piece, but the problem with the piece is its height and how it was attached to the base. So you can see that this one has come off, but it's really captured that GIACOMETTI style. Now this one doesn't have a base. And did it follow the guidelines exactly how I asked? No, it didn't. It doesn't have a base, so I'm fine with that. Here's another beautiful piece, but again, when I stand it up, it stood up when the student originally made it, but now it tends to fall over. So something to consider. Another piece, beautifully done, starting to get a little bit weaker. And then this one is probably one of my favorites. So I get you to have a look at that one. The other thing you might be wondering is why are all the pieces in either the bronze or black or gold? So what I did is I got students to choose a color or two, and then we were able to put them together to make like a little community, also based on GIACOMETTI's pieces. So how I set up my room. So the first thing I have is I have a container that is full of the plaster. So this is the plaster that I buy, and I keep a set of scissors in the plaster box because they're been and done. You're not going to use them for anything else. The next one I keep is a container for our wire. So I've got a few different things for wire. My armature wire, I've got a 1.5mm that I buy from Zart Art and a 3mm wire. Some smaller wire, these are the bugs bodies to get the kids started, and just some rainbow wire for a bit of decoration at the end. And I also have a container of pliers that we talk about as well. So how I'm going to get started is I've got a bug body, and we need to make some wings or some antennas or some legs and so forth. So for that, I'm going to cut a length of wire. Now when you're cutting your wire, you want to make sure that you don't get your fingers caught in the back or the pincher at the front. And I just skid that. It's really nice and easy. Now if you're worried about using the wire because it's too hard, I kid you not, it is really soft and really easy to use. The safety with the wire when you're in the room is you need to make sure the end that you're not using is bent over. So when the kids are threading their wire or manipulating their wire in some way, this end of the wire isn't going to take someone's eye out. So first thing we need to do is we're going to start off and we're going to make a bug body. And I will probably put that through, bend both ends over about halfway, give it a bit of a wrap around so that it holds. You don't want the bug body to be all wire. It's unpleasant. It doesn't look very attractive. So the idea is to use your wire to set up what you want to do. So there's one wing, going to wrap it around again and then make another wing. If you don't have the bug bodies, you don't need them. It's just fancy. Gives students start to have a base to make it started, because you're going to go over this with the plaster. Now I'm going to look at that and make sure my wings are a little bit symmetrical. Oh, I could use that for a little leg later. Now I'm going to make another wing. My little guy is going to have two wings. Bigger or smaller, do you think? The bottom one? Maybe about the same size. Wrap it round. Now how you choose to do that, that's fine. There's lots of little clips on the internet, how to join and start the wires also on that sheet that I showed you. Okay, so this is my bug. Beautiful? No, not really. But some of the examples that students make, Can you see? Some have a little more effort, but for the purpose of this will do. Okay, so we're going to go over to our work area. Now you need a good 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces of newspaper underneath, and you would get students to put an apron on. So I'll just grab an apron. Because we don't want the plaster going over their uniforms. So again, this is the roll of plaster that you purchase. This is what mine comes in. Now it's a full length, and you can't give students that because if they get it wet, it will ruin the plaster. So you give them a sheet or a length. Don't cut it up. They're old enough to cut it up themselves. And I usually get them to cut it up into strips and to squares for different reasons. So if I'm doing a square on this little piece here, this will only just hold. Whereas if I use a longer piece, I can wrap it around a couple of times, and then that will give it added strength. Now, it won't stay on like that. So all we're going to do is dunk it into the water, and that changes the makeup of it straight away. You've got plenty of time to work with it, and that will sit like so. We're going to give it a little bit of help to stay on there. You can squish it around, you can add more on, and you can shape it. So once it's on there, my plaster, if I give it a little bit of a wipe and mix that sort of powder and the plaster together, I can get a different sort of effect. Whereas on the bottom, I can have that sort of a mesh effect. So it's up to you which way you want to go for your figure. It's a bit hard to change once you've decided which way you're going to go, because once it's dry, you could maybe sandpaper it or something. So you can see how I'm using that longer piece to do my wing. And then again, I'm going to combine those together. You can add another sheet on if you wish. So I'm going to get a smaller piece now. Goes into the water. And I'm going to put that over my body. Tuck that in.
It's 12 o'clock.
And that's my son's device going off while I'm filming. It happens. My daughter will probably call me. Now, again, you can add more plaster on if you wish. So I'll just grab a couple more of those examples out to show you where you can go with your bugs. And the kids, they just have a play. It's nice to be in a room where not everything is getting ticked off and marked for assessment. Okay, so that's the bell. So the next thing, and I use the 1.5 armature wire for that onto the bug body. The next thing the students will do is they will grab a piece of wire for their figure. And of course you can see I've got this ready. This is a good example of what not to do with your wire. You need to keep it organized so that it's easy to get. Right, through there, around there, and out there. So this is what I mean about how easy the armature wire is to use. Okay, so when you're using your wire, you want a goodly length. What does that mean? That's not, that doesn't help you at all. So I'm looking at about 1.5 meters. So that's my whole piece of wire. And again, when you're working with your wire, you need to make sure your ends are bent over so you're not going to jab anyone in the face. So I have the wire and I've bent it in half. I get them to draw their figure on a piece of paper, and they use their drawing as a template. So their head is that size. So what I was saying, if you don't get students to draw out a figure, their piece can they've got no idea how the length of wire, how long it goes, where it all fits. So again, I have it bent over and I get students to kind of map in how their figure is going to go. Doesn't have to be perfect, but it gives them a really good idea about the length of the wire, the size of their figure, how big or how small it's going to be. Now from that, that's not going to stand up. It's not going to hold together at all. And then what we do is we can add more wire to that. So if I just cut another piece off, oh, actually I'll just cut this piece off. Being careful with pliers. Then you can start to, so if that's the head of my figure, I think that's next too small. Then you can start to build up shapes. Now the other thing you can do, so I would work towards creating a head. The other thing you can do is you can take newspaper, scrunch it up, and then you could sit that in your little guy's head. Probably too much. Oh no, that'll scrunch up all right. And then you can start to build your wire around that form. Now it's looking a bit messy at the moment, but you don't need to watch me make the whole thing. So again, that would come down to his neck. There's his arm. Come down to his body. And then you could start to build that together. So it's the same thing when you're doing your plastering. You can have different strips, lengths, to do that work. And you can have smaller bits for smaller amounts of detail. You do need to think about having a base for your plaster. And what we do is normally we just get nails and nail that into the figure. And then you could, or you can bend a nail over into a U shape, and then you can attach that as well. Once it's all dry and set, then you can paint it black. And then we can have a whole community of little plaster figures that all come together. If you have time and you need to get your students to document that folio process, you can do that as well. Going through the steps they've gone to create their wire figure, and then adding their plaster on and doing an evaluation. So their likes, dislikes, and so forth. Now the other thing you could do is if students want to add a fabric or another medium onto that, they could put that in as far as their samples go. The other thing I did after this, because we had 2 lessons, I took the students outside and we played with our shadows. So the shadows of the students on the just the ground, and then they were able to draw their shadow or incorporate their shadow and draw something in that. So I just called that passing shadow. So that was a fun bit of play that we did as well.